Hi Year 9, this is Mr. Tapley here for your next lesson of Year 9 Civics and Citizenship in Term 3. So our learning intention this lesson is to develop our understanding of democracy, which is the type of system of government that we have in Australia, and then also other systems of government such as a monarchy or a dictatorship. And our goal, why we're doing this, is to reflect upon the strengths and weaknesses of democracy, so what's good, what's bad about our system of government in our home, and then evaluate it and compare it to other systems of government around the world. So what are our strengths and weaknesses compared to a dictatorship? What can our country do better? What can their country do better? So, a democracy is a system of government of the people, for the people, and by the people. A very famous quote from Abraham Lincoln, former US president. In a democratic nation, such as Australia, the government is constructed of elected representatives. So if you're a fan of, Game of Thrones, a show like that, the government that they're showing on that show is a monarchy. So you have a king, their son, the prince, becomes king after he dies, his son becomes king, etc., etc. So a monarchy, you're elected basically because of your birth. It's your birthright to rule. In a democracy, in Australia, the government is made up of people who have been elected. They've been voted into power. The people of the nation are the people who vote, and they vote these government members into power, not based on their looks or based on their last name. They're voting them into power to represent them, to represent their views and beliefs. So if I feel very strongly about fighting climate change, I'm going to vote for a politician, an elected representative, who is going to work to fix climate change. If someone feels very strongly about refugee rights and asylum seeker rights, they're going to vote for people who will then represent their views and beliefs. The key principles and features of a democracy are individual human rights and freedom. So you have the freedom to vote. Your human right is to vote, to participate in government. Anyone can run for government, anyone at all. Inclusive elections, so everyone who is above the age of 18 can vote. Everyone who is an Australian citizen can vote in these elections. Equality, so because everyone can vote, because everyone has the same human rights, in theory, the nation is equal. There's no one who's being treated better or worse, in theory. And then a representative government is obviously the key feature of a democracy. So in theory, the people being elected, the majority of the nation is going to vote for them. Therefore, the majority of the people of Australia will agree with them, and their government will represent the majority of Australia. So a democracy has strengths and weaknesses, obviously, as a system of government. However, there are alternatives. There are other options, other systems of government found in nations around the world, such as a dictatorship. Not a word you want to hear really about your government. A dictatorship refers to absolute, unrestricted power. So this individual can do whatever they want, and it's all held by one individual, that power. So examples of that in past history, Nazi Germany, look at Adolf Hitler. That was a dictatorship. He had all the power in that country. That one man could do whatever he wanted. North Korea, we've got my boy down here, Kim Jong. North Korea is a dictatorship. Kim Jong is the supreme leader of North Korea, and he has absolute unrestricted power. No one can stop him. He does whatever he wants. Cameroon is a nation in Africa, which is also a dictatorship. Those are modern day examples compared to Nazi Germany. If you're looking for an absolute monarch, a monarch is a king or a queen. It's a monarchy. You guys hopefully remember this stuff from year 8, feudal Europe. So it's royalty, and a monarch, similar to a dictator, holds absolute unrestricted power. Monarchs are usually put into power, again, by birthright. A dictatorship, that usually happens when someone grabs power forcefully. They're using military force. They're using the army. Absolute monarch is usually passed down from generation to generation, keeping it in the family. So an example of a monarchy, if you want to go back into history, might be ancient Egypt. Modern day examples, we have the king of Saudi Arabia, chilling right there. I don't know what he's reading. And then another modern example would be Liechtenstein, which is a very small European nation, hard to pronounce. Oligarchy is the final type of government that we will look at. So when a dictatorship power is held by one individual, oligarchy is very, very similar. It can be one individual, but it's usually power held by a small group of individuals. So it's usually the boss oligarch, and then he's got a couple of mates who help him run the country. And the important thing to know about oligarchy is that those people are not elected. Dictatorship, they're not elected. Absolute monarch, not elected. But oligarchy, not elected into power. So you've got the Prime Minister of Russia there. See, that's a very interesting one, because technically Russia is a democracy. They have elections, you vote for people to get into power, but in reality, it's an oligarchy, because they're just pretending to be a democracy. But if you actually go to Russia and you look at the voting paper, it doesn't matter what you're voting. It's going to be Vladimir Putin, the guy in this photo right here. He's going to win every single time. He's actually changed the Russian constitution, again, the rule book to our nation, himself, so that he can stay in power. There used to be a law in Russia that said you could only serve as prime minister for so many years. He got rid of that law. So you can see how he's gaining more and more power over time, because he's literally changing the rule book of the nation, the constitution. You shouldn't be able to do that in a democratic country without consulting the people. He was just like, I'm going to do this myself. So those systems of government all have strengths and weaknesses, similar to democracy. I'm not here to say which one is the best one. I'm just saying that they've all got strengths and weaknesses. Looking at democracy, the strengths of democracy are, in theory, that the people in power, these politicians, these elected representatives, are elected by the people. Therefore, to be elected, politicians need to support and represent the needs of the people. Unless they're lying, which is, again, it might happen. The only way they're going to be elected is if they do what the people want. So in theory, your government is doing what the majority of the country wants you to do. So that's a good thing. They're representing the needs of the people. In theory, a democracy is inclusive. It promotes equality. Everyone can vote, and the important thing is that everyone has an equal vote. It wouldn't really be a fair democracy if you all had one vote, but everyone in Western Australia, their vote counted for 100 votes each. That wouldn't really be fair. But everyone has an equal vote, and everyone can vote in a democracy, as long as you're above 18. Weaknesses. A very famous philosopher once came up with this phrase here, which I quite like. The tyranny of majority rule. Tyranny being like evil suppression, evil power. So the evil power of majority rule. So in a democracy, the decisions being made by the government, the laws, etc. being created, support the majority of the people. To be elected, you have to have the majority of the votes, which is a good thing. However, does this support minorities? So for example, if we have a class vote about whether the teacher or the students in a class get to select the music every lesson, the students will win every time. So the majority is going to win in that situation, which is a good thing, right? That's good for the majority. However, if that happens literally every time, the minority will be ignored. So the minority's rights, the minority's interests are not being represented ever. And that sounds good to you guys because you're winning in that situation. But what if my example was, okay, the year 9s have to clean up the entire school, or it's going to be everyone else in the school, and we have a vote about that. Obviously, you guys are going to lose that vote literally every time, and you're going to be cleaning the school every single time. So consider a national example, who the minorities might be, like immigrants or Indigenous Australians. They're the minority in this country. The majority are always going to win a vote. So will Indigenous Australians, will immigrants have their interests supported? That's the tyranny of majority rule. It's good for the majority, crap for everyone else. And then the other weakness that we touched on in a previous lesson, uninformed voters. So some voters do not attend Year 9 civics and citizenship classes, and they don't know who they're voting for, what they're voting for. They just rock up, wake up 2 hours late after the voting has stopped. They go there and they just write the first thing they can see. Some people list their votes just alphabetically, like this guy's name is Aronson. He's getting my vote, number 1. I'm being lazy. And that leads to a government that doesn't represent the people. Democracy really only works if the people voting are voting for who they want, not just because they're being lazy or they don't understand who they're voting for. There was a controversy last year in our local election in Monash Council, where one of the political party candidates who was running for office put up some signs in an area that English wasn't their first language, and everyone saw the signs and they were like, okay, they're helping them vote. But what they didn't realize was that they were telling them to vote for one specific party. So those people were being misled about how to fill in the form properly. So the government isn't going to represent the people. Politicians can use uninformed voters to get elected when they shouldn't really be elected. You look at Donald Trump in America. He used misinformation. He lied to people to be elected into power. And now that he's in power, he doesn't really represent the interests of all people. So that's a weakness of democracy. It can be manipulated. It can be used improperly. So let's use a real-world example to compare these different systems of government. So systems of government versus COVID-19, coronavirus, very topical. There have been many different responses and strategies to managing COVID-19 around the world. I'm not sure how often you guys have been checking the news, but I found it interesting looking at different countries around the world and how their numbers of cases and fatalities have been going up and down depending on their system of government. There have been different levels of success and failure, and often you can connect it to, oh, that country is a democracy, that country is a dictatorship. There's a pattern that emerges when you start to look at the numbers. For example, in nations such as China has again, similar to Russia, they are technically a democracy, but in reality they are a authoritarian government, which means that the leader, whose name I can't pronounce, I want to say Xi Jinping, is technically a oligarch. He technically has all the power in that country. Again, you go to the elections in China, you're going to be presented with a ballot slip that says, would you like to vote for Xi Jinping? Yes. Yes, thumbs up. Yes, exclamation point. But anyway, in nations such as that, where the government has complete, total power, they have forcefully ordered citizens to obey laws and rules that may interfere with their individual rights. So you see it a lot in America, where they're saying, my freedoms, my human rights, etc., etc. And you have people who are anti-maskers. They refuse to wear masks to battle the coronavirus because they claim it's infringing on their human rights, which is stupid, but we'll get into that later. Whereas in China, less of a focus on those human rights, more of a focus on how can we improve the entire country. I don't care what you think, I'm going to save the whole country. So that's benefited the community. So interfering with their individual human rights has benefited the entire community. And that's allowed China to be one of the most successful nations in combating this global pandemic. So they haven't cared about hurting Jono's feelings. Jono's feelings are hurt, but the country is saved. So is that a positive or a negative? The fact that they've defeated coronavirus much better than other countries, but to do so, they've had to hurt someone's feelings. They've had to infringe on human rights. In democratic nations, such as the USA, the democratic government is limited in what laws and rules they can enforce. So they can't create laws that are going to interfere with human rights, because that's a key feature of democracy: freedom, equality, etc. Individual states also have their own laws and rights, which makes it even more complicated. So because power isn't held by one person, you've got 100 people making 100 different decisions, and none of them can hurt anyone's feelings or break anyone's human rights. And this emphasis on individual freedoms has really damaged any attempt to fight the coronavirus, which has led to higher sickness levels and higher amounts of death. Again, I'm not sure if you guys have read the news recently, but in Victoria, there was an incident recently where they shut down a number of apartment buildings. And a lot of people were really, really, really upset when they locked those down, because they said, oh, that's not fair to those people. You're infringing on their human rights, etc., etc. It's not fair. In China, that was just what they did from day one. And that's worked much better than in our democratic country, where we've been focused on human rights. We're saying, oh, we can't do that. It would help us defeat the coronavirus, but we're not going to hurt their human rights, democracy. So you have to compare the different responses, the different pros and cons of each government. So, 3 questions for our lesson activities today. First question is relating back to that first slide, that first quote about democracy. So a democracy is a system of the government of the people, for the people, and by the people. Use your understanding of the definition of democracy to explain what this quote means. So what you know about democracy, the system of government, the features of democracy, what does this quote mean right here? So what does it mean by of the people, for the people, and by the people? So there's kind of 3 elements you're trying to define in this question here. So explain what that quote means. It might help if you look up who made that quote as well, which I did say at the start of the video. Question 2. This was very relevant for me because I'm doing Year 7 Ancient Rome with my Year 7s at the moment. Anyway, you guys probably can't remember that stuff though. Ancient Rome held a democratic government. So back in the day, they were also a democracy. However, in times of emergency, so if there was a war, if there was an invading country at the doorsteps of the city, They would say, all right, we're getting rid of democracy for the day. The city would suspend the government, and they would elect one person, usually a general in the army, to be the ruler of the city to solve the crisis. Do you believe a democratic nation in Australia can effectively respond to COVID-19? So can we combat these global issues, these global pandemics, these emergencies, if we are a democratic nation? Or should we do what ancient Rome did and change our system of government temporarily? Or should we change our system of government permanently? And should we go to what China has with a oligarchy or a dictatorship, something like that, where one person makes all the decisions, and that can help decisions get made quicker and smoother? Question 3. A concern and weakness of democracy, this is connected to that tyranny of majority rule statement, is that minorities, such as immigrants or Indigenous Australians, may not be supported by the government. How can we address this concern? So how can you support minorities when the majorities are getting all the votes, all the wins in democracy? So 3 questions there, guys. Each question, not after an essay length response, probably 2 or 3 sentences. Some of these probably 3 to 4 sentences, but I think you've got enough information in the slides to smash through those questions. There's also information in your textbook, but really the slides are all you need to complete these questions. A lot of these questions, no right or wrong answer. It's just your opinion. And then, of course, in Humanities, it's all about your ability to explain your opinion, to support your response. So if you have any questions about that or about the questions, please let me know. Otherwise, best of luck and cheers.